The cool autumn breeze rushed ahead of a storm brewing in the western part of the valley. It was late in the day, and as the dark clouds began to cluster, Samuel James Harper flipped up the collar on his flannel shirt. Sam, as he was commonly called, muttered to himself, "Good thing I wore this shirt. Those clouds are bound to bring the temperature down even further. We might even see some snow by morning." His flannel shirt, a heavy green and brown plaid, was practically a jacket. It wasn't quite camouflage, but it blended him in nicely with the forest and even kept a bit of moisture out. Sam was on his way back from an unsuccessful bow hunting trip, the kind of outing he always enjoyed. Hunting, fishing, or anything that got him out in nature brought him peace, especially on his own land, with its dense woods and nearby streams. Tracking game demanded skill, and that challenge was what Sam enjoyed most, knowing he'd benefit from the meat or fish he brought back. But he didn't think much of hunting with a rifle. Anyone can sit a few hundred yards away with a powerful, scoped rifle, take down an animal, and call it hunting, he often told his friends who preferred guns. Try getting within 30 or 40 yards with a bow, and bringing down a deer, an elk, whatever you're after. That's a true test of skill, and gives the animal a fighting chance. Sam was back on his own property, a spread in Missouri nestled right in the heart of the Ozarks. It was 960 acres, a section and a half, passed down in his family for over 80 years. The land stretched over mostly wooded hills, a handful of small streams, one large lake, and a few grassy meadows. Moving through the trees and brush, Sam was as agile and quiet as a mountain lion, despite standing 6 feet 2. His ability to track and slip soundlessly through the forest was something he'd learned from his father and grandfather. With his lean, fit build, dark eyes and hair, and skin deepened by years spent outdoors, Sam's Native American roots were clear. He wondered if his preference for the bow came from that part of his heritage. As Sam made his way back toward the old farmhouse, he thought about the stories of how this land came into his family. This place feels like more than just a home, it's like an old friend, he thought, much more so than my apartment back in St. Louis. His great-great-grandparents had migrated from the West Texas plains northward to Missouri during the Great Depression, in 1935. Texas was rough in those days, perhaps even more so than the rest of the country. Jobs were non-existent, and a severe drought made farming next to impossible. Settling in the Ozarks, the family found a place where nobody cared much that both Sam's great-great-grandmother and grandmother were full-blooded Osage from the reservation in Oklahoma. Once there, the Harpers set up a homestead and began building a life. Great-great-grandpa Jacob Harper did whatever was needed to keep food on the table. Jacob knew he needed cash if he was going to approach the bank that actually owned the land they were living on. He figured if he could scrape together a decent down payment, he might be able to buy the land on credit. Jacob was dead certain that if he could get the title in hand, he'd make the farm work. Back then, wild cattle roamed the hills, left behind by folks who'd either moved on or abandoned the animals when they couldn't afford to keep feeding them through winter. Jacob rounded up a small herd of these wild cattle, not for selling, but as food on the hoof for his family. He also took up running a trap line for pelts and furs, starting in late fall when the animals grew their winter coats, and wrapping up just before spring thaw when those heavy coats began to shed. Money was tight, but the General Mercantile gave him store credit for coyote, beaver, muskrat, and marten skins. Now and then, he even received a little cash. Another income source for folks in those hills was the moonshine Jacob made. Tucked away in a hollow, his homemade still produced a quality shine that was highly prized. Although Prohibition had ended 2 years earlier, the hill folks couldn't, or wouldn't, pay the high prices of store-bought liquor, which was taxed by government-sanctioned distilleries. Most hill people weren't fond of the government or its agents, the G-men, and there had been plenty of run-ins between the revenuers and the fiercely independent moonshiners scattered through the Missouri hills. Tax-free, illegal, white lightning provided these folks with a cheaper, more satisfying option. After about a year and a half, Jacob managed to save a little over $400, a considerable sum for the times. He loaded his wagon and set off on a 2-day, 50-mile trip to Vannon, the county seat of Carter County, to purchase the land and stock up on supplies. With no more than 400 residents, Vannon was a small town, but it held what Jacob needed: Caldwell Barkley, owner of both the land and the local bank. "The land's worth more than $2,000, Mr. Harper," Barkley said after hearing Jacob's offer. "Why should I settle for less than it's worth?" "Yes, sir, you're right," Jacob replied respectfully. "That farm's probably worth more, but not these days. This depression, as they call it, isn't ending anytime soon. And right now, how much is that land making you?" "I'll give you $30 each month till the loan and interest are paid off." "To me, it seems like having a bird in the hand beats one in the bush you might never catch." Jacob watched as Barkley seemed to weigh his words. "Think of it this way, Mr. Barkley, if I pay for a few months and then can't continue, you can always take the land back," he said, holding up the $400. "At least you get something out of it instead of just letting it sit there, earning nothing." Seeing the money in Jacob's hand, Barkley revised his initial impression of him as just another uneducated hill boy. "This fellow might be onto something," Barkley mused, staring at Jacob thoughtfully. "I don't see this depression ending anytime soon, no matter what the government says." After a moment of contemplation, Barkley finally spoke. "We have a deal, Mr. Harper," he said, extending his hand for the money. "I'll just take your down payment to the vault." "I'd like something in writing about this agreement," Jacob replied, "and a receipt for the $400, too." "This man's no fool," Barkley thought, impressed. He grabbed a piece of foolscap and handwrote 2 copies of the mortgage terms, including the penalties. After both he and Jacob signed, he handed over a copy. "Congratulations, Mr. Harper, you've bought yourself a farm." "Reckon I have," Jacob said with a nod. "I'll be back next month with your payment." Leaving the bank, he stopped by the general store to load up on supplies, then spent the day and most of the night making his way back to the farm. That section and a half of land had been passed down from father to son, generation after generation. Sam inherited the land from his father, James, 5 years earlier, when he was 27. A drunk driver had taken his parents' lives, and Sam inherited the property through their will. His father, James Harper, had mostly used the place as a hobby farm, bringing in electricity and plumbing the farmhouse to the well. While James and his wife enjoyed some light gardening, the old farmhouse and surrounding land served primarily as a retreat from the busy city life. They'd leased out the fields and parts of the valleys to a local farmer. But when Sam took over, he decided to make a few changes. He notified the farmer that the lease would continue for the rest of the season and one more, but after that, it wouldn't be renewed. Sam got to work renovating the old house, rebuilding the barn, and transforming the property into a kind of hunting and fishing preserve. Reaching the crest of a small hill, Sam paused and looked down at his cabin nestled near the tree-line of a narrow valley. A light mist was beginning to fall, and as dusk settled in, the soft glow from the 2 cabin windows seemed warm and welcoming in the approaching night. A faint column of smoke rose from the chimney, and a grin spread across Sam's face. "Ray must have the fireplace going," he thought. "She's probably got dinner on the stove, too. Sure hope so, 'cause I'm starving after this hike." Before heading down, he took a moment to survey the 2 valleys separated by the hill he stood on, feeling a profound sense of being home. He worked in St. Louis, but his heart and his real home were right here on this land. He started down the slope toward the valley, his smile broadening as he thought about how he'd met Ray. It had been at an outdoor sports expo on a Friday. He'd gone to check out some archery and fishing gear, and there she was, the girl promoting an outdoor sports resort. Reading her name tag aloud with a smile, Sam said, "Alyssa Bod." But his interest leaned more toward Alyssa than her resort. His farm was all the resort he needed. What he really wanted was to get to know her better. "Yes, sir," she said with a friendly smile, shaking his hand. "And you are?" "Forgot my manners," Sam replied, chuckling. "I'm Samuel Harper. Sam to my friends." She nodded, still smiling. Well, let me tell you about Lost Creek Resort, Alyssa began, describing the activities and adventures awaiting guests. Lost Creek sits along the shores of Greer's Ferry Lake and has over 3 miles of shoreline, she explained. We're in Arkansas, about a 2-hour drive north and a bit east of Little Rock, and roughly 2 hours west of Jonesboro. St. Louis is a little over 5 hours north and slightly west of us. Sam only half registered what she was saying, his attention mostly on her. She was tall, he thought, standing at least 5'9", maybe 5'10". Alyssa was fit and graceful, with long auburn hair and large, expressive brown eyes. Handsome, he thought, might be a better word than pretty, altogether, quite a striking presence. We have 1,000 acres full of deer, elk, turkey, and various other wildlife, she continued. There are miles of hiking trails, and we offer float trips on the White River by canoe, kayak, or inflatable rafts. Plus, we have tours and fishing trips on the lake. Alyssa's speech was clearly rehearsed, yet she delivered it with real enthusiasm and depth. As she went through her presentation, Alyssa found herself intrigued by the tall, ruggedly handsome man listening so intently. He seems like he belongs in the outdoors more than in the city, she mused. Wanting to keep him around a bit longer, she handed Sam a special, full-color brochure filled with images of Lost Creek Resort. There's a 20% discount voucher in there, she offered. Sam glanced at the brochure, then handed it back with a polite smile. Miss Bod, I appreciate it, but I'm not really interested. Ray, she corrected him with a warm smile. My friends call me Ray. Why aren't you interested in Lost Creek? She asked, curiosity in her voice. I've got my own retreat out in the Ozark Hills near Van Buren, Sam replied. Nearly 1,000 acres with plenty of elk, deer, and turkey roaming around. Even got a black bear and her 2 cubs staying in a cave on a bluff across my property. My land has several year-round creeks and a pretty good-sized lake. He flashed a grin. You'll have to let me show you around sometime. Ray returned his smile with interest. Well, I'd have to know you a lot better before heading off to the middle of nowhere, she teased. We can fix that, Sam said. This expo wraps up on Sunday. How about dinner on Monday evening? We can start this getting to know you process. Why wait? Ray replied with a playful smile. I'm off at 5 today. The sooner we start, the sooner we'll finish, and the sooner I can check out this resort of yours. Sam chuckled, nodding. All right, I'll see you at 5. That dinner turned into many more. Ray and Sam started meeting up at least twice a week, sometimes more when she wasn't traveling for another outdoor or travel expo. Over time, Sam realized that Ray was more than just the beautiful face representing Lost Creek. She'd grown up on a farm near Columbia, Missouri, held a master's degree in business administration, and a BS in hospitality management. Her ultimate goal was to manage a collection of resorts like Lost Creek. Almost exactly 3 months after they first met, Ray finally got a tour of what she called Sam's resort. Sam had modernized and upgraded the property but had carefully preserved its historic character. The house was a sprawling, single-story structure, similar to the old ranch-style homes you'd find on the West Texas plains. 2 separate sections of the building were joined by a covered breezeway. Sam had even enclosed the walkway with walls and added windows, allowing access between the sections without exposure to the elements. Across the breezeway lay the second part of the house, which contained a master suite, 2 additional bedrooms, and a guest bathroom. Though Sam rarely had guests, he wanted anyone who visited to feel comfortable. He'd updated the bathrooms and plumbing and even drilled a second well to guarantee fresh water, though he'd kept the old kitchen pump as a reminder of the house's history. The main house faced west, making it the perfect spot to sit on the large front porch and watch the sun set from one of the 2 classic rocking chairs. The back of the house, with its own porch and another set of rockers, offered a view of the sunrise over the eastern hills. The main section of the house was one vast, open space, blending a near-gourmet kitchen, a spacious dining area with an old farm table, and a front room styled as a large family gathering area. Tucked against a sidewall in the house was a small bathroom. Ray quickly fell in love with the old farmhouse and the valley surrounding it. The story of how Sam's family had acquired the land fascinated her, and she showed him she was just as comfortable in the woods as he was, sharing his passion for the outdoors. With her hair tied back in a ponytail and barely any makeup, she fit right in with the hunting crew. Ray helped coordinate which expos Lost Creek Resort and a few other vacation spots would attend. When she wasn't working an expo, Sam would pick her up right after his shift on Fridays, and they'd head out of town. The drive to the farm was about 4 hours, with the last hour winding through back roads, forest access trails, and an old, rutted path leading up to the house. In the first week of November, Sam and Ray made the trip to the farm. Deer archery season had just one more week, and Sam intended to bring home a buck. Busy schedules had kept them from the farm earlier in the season. Once they arrived, Sam hauled in firewood while Ray put away the supplies they'd brought, planning to stay for 4 or 5 days. "If I get a deer in the first day or two, we can spend the rest of the time fishing, hiking, or just soaking up the quiet," Sam told Ray. "Is there a chance you won't get a deer?" Ray teased, acting mock surprised. Grinning, Sam picked up his bow. "Using this instead of a rifle gives the animal a pretty fair shot at getting away," he replied. Ray giggled, dashed across the room, and leaped into Sam's lap. "Well, you're clever enough to make me fall in love with you, and that's more than enough for me." Sam held her close, smiling. "I love you too, Ray." Then, reaching into his jean jacket pocket, he pulled out a small ring box. Opening it, he held it up to her and asked, "Will you marry me?" Ray's answer was an ecstatic squeal, followed by a kiss on his lips. Hours passed before they even remembered to have dinner. As they got ready for bed after a long, warm shower, Sam said, "I'm heading out before first light. I'll try my luck up near that big rock shelf in the next valley. Might not be back till late afternoon, maybe dusk. But if I get a deer, I'll be back sooner." The next morning, as Sam made his way back, his thoughts drifted to Ray. Suddenly, a downpour snapped him back to the present as the skies opened up. He quickened his pace, thinking, better get inside. Stepping onto the back porch, he shook off the rain and grabbed a dry towel hanging from a peg. Carefully, he wiped down his bow and leather quiver. The quiver, which held a dozen broadhead-tipped arrows for large game, was one he'd crafted himself from high-quality leather. His recurve bow was a custom job by Black Widow bows out of Nixa, Missouri, made just for him after months of precise measurements and testing. Once he'd hung up the bow and quiver on pegs to acclimate to the warmth of the room, he unbuckled his leather belt, which held a small hunting pouch and knife, and hung it up as well. After scraping the mud from his boots, he stepped inside. The sight that greeted him was unsettling. Ray was sitting at the kitchen table, her head down, with her hair concealing her face. When she finally looked up, Sam noticed a red handprint on her cheek. He took a step toward her, then froze as he registered the presence of 4 armed men standing by the door. The largest of the group held a .45 pistol, aimed straight at Sam. "That's far enough, friend," the man with the gun said, motioning with the weapon. "Take a seat next to the lady." Sam sat down next to Ray, quickly checking to make sure she was otherwise unharmed. "There's no cash here," he said calmly. "The keys to my truck are in the ignition. Take it, grab whatever supplies you need, and leave us alone." The big man chuckled and shook his head. "You don't get it, friend." Gesturing to each man in turn, he introduced them, "That's Earl, Mitch, Roy, and I'm Hank. We're about to become your worst nightmare." Sam sized each of them up quickly. Earl was gaunt and skeletal, with stark white hair. Mitch was short but solidly built, while Roy had a wild, almost manic glint in his eyes. Towering over them all was Hank, standing 6'4", radiating an unnerving mix of cruelty and friendliness. "So what is it you want?" Sam asked, his mind racing with ways to protect Ray. Hank's grin widened. "Ever read a short story called The Most Dangerous Game?" he asked. Sam nodded, glancing at Ray, who remained silent. "It's about a rich guy who hunts people for sport on his private island," Hank explained. "I've hunted every big game across the US, Canada, Alaska, you name it. But I got bored. After reading that story, I decided to take on a different kind of challenge, hunting people. And you two will be my next game." "Why us?" Sam asked, working to keep his voice steady. "Well, I was scouting a spot outside Fremont last August," Hank said, "and when I stopped at the courthouse in Van Buren for a deer tag, I heard you chatting with the gas station owner about hunting on your land. He said it was perfect, out in the middle of nowhere. That piqued my interest, so I dug a little deeper." His grin turned menacing. "Now here we are. 50 miles from the nearest town, no trespassing signs all around, seems like the perfect place for my experiment. And after you're done here, what then?" Sam pressed. "Oh, I figure this place will work just fine for more hunts," Hank replied smoothly. "After we're through with you, we'll find others and bring them here for our entertainment. You know, that story ends with the hunter becoming the hunted, and losing his life," Sam pointed out. Hank smirked. "Sure, that's how the story goes, but this is real life. I'll be fine." "That story was one man hunting another," Sam said, nodding toward the other 3 men. "What about them?" "I wanted to share the thrill of the hunt with my friends," Hank replied. "Tomorrow at dawn, you'll get an hour's head start. After that, we come after you." "What about Ray?" Sam asked, his voice taut. "The lady here," Hank sneered, "will be the prize for whoever kills you. And trust me, I hope it's me." He laughed, adding, "And if I win, I'll share the trophy with my friends. I expect the same courtesy from them." Sam clenched his jaw, but Hank pointed his gun at him and Ray. "None of that now," Hank warned. "Both of you, get over to the couch." Turning to Earl, he added, "Tie them up, but don't make it too tight. I want our prey to have feeling in his hands and feet come morning. Gotta keep it sporting, after all." Earl, the skinny one, pulled out a nylon climbing rope and tightly bound Sam's hands and feet, then did the same to Ray. "Might as well try to get some rest," Hank said, grinning. "The hunt begins at dawn. Will the prey be allowed a weapon?" Sam asked dryly. Hank scoffed. "Not a chance. I'm not risking one of us getting hurt if you happen to get lucky. You'll be unarmed." Hank, Earl, and Roy went through the breezeway toward the bedrooms, leaving Mitch on guard duty. Sam and Ray exchanged whispered words when Mitch wasn't paying attention, discussing what options they had. For hours later, they were still awake when Earl came to relieve Mitch. After Mitch left, Earl poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove, giving Sam and Ray a moment to exchange one last look. While Earl's attention was on pouring his coffee, Sam leaned close to Ray and whispered, "No matter what, I'll come back for you." Ray looked at him, a soft smile forming. "I know you will," she replied, leaning in to give him a quick kiss. "Just don't get yourself killed. They're not good enough to catch me, so stay alive, and I'll be waiting." Sam's words seemed to give Ray renewed strength, and she nodded with determination. Before long, the first light of dawn began to brighten the sky. Hank, Earl, and Mitch joined Roy in the kitchen, each with a cup of coffee in hand. Hank drew his gun and motioned for Earl to untie Sam. "Let him stretch his legs before we send him on his way," he ordered. The men allowed Sam a long drink of water before nudging him toward the back door. "You'll get a 1-hour head start," Hank told him. "We won't be watching, but when the hour's up, we're coming after you." Sam opened his mouth to say something, but Hank raised a hand. "Clock's ticking, you've got 59 minutes now. Sam held Hank's gaze for a moment, then stepped out onto the back porch as Hank shut the door behind him with a dark smile. Outside, Sam grabbed his bow, quiver, and hunting belt from the pegs along the wall. Good thing they didn't check the back wall, he thought, then set off at a ground-eating jog across the yard. 10 minutes later, he settled behind a massive oak tree on a hill overlooking the valley and the house. The rain had stopped overnight, but now low-hanging clouds had begun to release a soft snowfall, dusting the forest as Sam waited. About half an hour into his so-called head start, he spotted Hank, Mitch, and Roy stepping onto the back porch. Hank gestured up the nearest path, and the men headed straight into the woods. So much for an hour head start in being sporting, Sam thought with grim amusement. If the snow picks up, it'll be tough not to leave a trail. Sam watched as the men crested the hill and disappeared on the other side. He tightened the laces on his winter moccasins, designed to let him move silently through the woods, and waited a few minutes longer to make sure they were gone. Only 3 of them. Looks like Earl stayed back to guard Ray, he thought, formulating his plan. Moving cautiously, Sam made his way down the hill to the back of the house. Peering quickly through one of the windows, he saw Earl seated at the kitchen table, facing the front door with his head down, focused on a game of solitaire. Ray was still on the couch, watching Earl intently, tension evident in her posture. Her hands were still bound, but in a swift move, she swung her feet to the floor and lunged at Earl. Sam watched as Earl grabbed a pistol from the table and struck Ray across the face, sending her sprawling to the floor. He pointed the gun at her, shouting threats. Sam knocked an arrow, preparing to move toward the door. He was confident he could fire before Earl had time to turn on him. Just as Sam reached for the door handle, he heard one of the other men coming down the trail, yelling back to the others that he was getting the binoculars. Before Sam could make his move, a rifle shot cracked, and a bullet struck the back wall near his head. He ducked instinctively, hearing the delayed report of the shot. Earl swung around, gun pointed at the door, alerted by the noise. Realizing he'd lost his advantage, Sam pivoted and sprinted toward the trees at the corner of the house, putting distance between himself and Mitch, who was descending the hill. Earl emerged from the house and fired off a few rounds in Sam's direction as he darted for cover. Sam knew he could have taken down one of the men, but handling both at once was a gamble he couldn't afford. If he broke in and took Earl down, he'd still be trapped with Ray inside, fending off the others in a drawn-out siege. Alternatively, if he took Mitch out first, Earl would have the chance to harm Ray. Even if he managed to take out both men, they would still need to escape, and while Ray was strong, she couldn't match his speed. They'd just end up being recaptured. There would be another chance, Sam promised himself. Moments later, Hank and Roy made their way down the hill and met up with Mitch and Earl, who had stepped onto the porch. What happened? Hank demanded. First, Earl and then Mitch described how Sam had briefly reappeared at the cabin. Looks like our friend is trying to be clever, Hank said with a smirk. All right, tie the girl up tight and stay sharp, Earl. The rest of us are moving out. Pointing toward the woods Sam had vanished into, Hank assigned Roy to circle around from the right while Mitch was sent left, taking the middle path himself. Keep your eyes peeled, and we'll trap him between us. If you spot him, fire 2 quick shots, and the others will come to back you up. Got it? Roy and Mitch nodded, then turned back into the woods, with Hank following a moment later, his rifle ready. He assumed Sam would take off and try to outrun them. He was wrong. Sam, watching from a concealed spot, waited until he understood their strategy. Seeing them split up, he quietly picked up Roy's trail, noticing that Roy was following a game trail as if expecting Sam to use it to gain speed. Moving quickly and silently, Sam looped around and got a couple of 100 yards ahead of Roy. The snow had picked up but was only starting to stick in open patches. Sam stayed under the trees, careful not to leave tracks. Ahead, he found an 8-foot-tall rotted stump along the game trail. The hollow, dead tree had one opening into its center, and Sam pulled out his hunting knife, stepping inside to wait for Roy. Roy moved cautiously along the trail, holding his rifle ready. A faint rustling sounded behind him, and as he turned, strong arms wrapped around his neck, and the sharp edge of a knife pressed lightly to his throat. He tensed and tried to resist, but Sam's grip held firm. "Stay quiet if you want to live," Sam whispered. "Drop your rifle and kick it away." Roy hesitated, and Sam's blade traced a shallow line across his neck, drawing a thin line of blood. "Do it, or I'll finish the job," Sam warned. Roy complied, dropping his rifle and kicking it aside. Sam shoved his knee into the back of Roy's leg, forcing him down to the wet, leaf-covered ground. With Roy on his stomach, Sam pulled each of his hands behind him and secured them with a zip tie from his hunting pouch, adding another around his ankles. To be sure, Sam pulled Roy's feet up and bound them to his wrists with a third tie. "That should keep you out of trouble," Sam said, cutting 2 strips from Roy's jacket. He stuffed one strip into Roy's mouth and tied it in place with the other. "Don't go anywhere, I'll be back," Sam muttered, giving Roy's shoulder a pat. He picked up Roy's rifle and stashed it well off the trail, not wanting to fire it and alert the others. Then, he quietly moved east, where the light breeze covered his steps. Meanwhile, Mitch, having climbed a steep, brush-covered hill, paused to catch his breath. He brushed some moss off a log and sat down, pulling out a cigarette. Just as he struck a match, he felt a sharp point press into the back of his neck. Slowly turning, he saw Sam standing there, an arrow pointed directly at him. "Lose the rifle," Sam commanded in a calm voice. Mitch obeyed, and Sam pushed him face down onto the ground. He tied Mitch's hands, feet, and mouth just as he'd done with Roy, ensuring Mitch wouldn't be able to call out or resist. Sam then hid Mitch's rifle as he had done with the first one before slipping back into the woods. "Now, let's see if I can find your friend," Sam muttered, slipping quietly through the trees. Just then, a rifle cracked, and a bullet hissed past his head. Without hesitation, Sam spun and brought his bow up in one swift motion, releasing a hunting arrow. The carbon graphite shaft, tipped with a razor-sharp broadhead, flew the 40-foot distance in under a second. It struck Hank just below the breastbone, sending him to his knees. The arrow drove clean through, its tip protruding from Hank's back. He glanced down at the shaft, then looked up, giving Sam a mocking salute before collapsing. "No need to tie this one up," Sam murmured, moving like a ghost through the woods as he made his way back toward the farmhouse. Stepping onto the back porch, he peered through the window. Earl was back at the kitchen table, his back against the wall, pistol braced on the table as he kept a nervous eye on both the front and back doors. Sam knocked on the door, seeing Earl jump and aim the pistol at the sound. "Earl, it's Sam," he called out. "Roy and Mitch are tied up on the ridge. Hank's there too, but he wasn't so lucky. I've got the girl." Sam's voice turned steely. "If you hurt her, Earl, I'll make you regret it." "Leave your gun and come outside," Sam ordered calmly. "I promise I won't hurt you." Earl's voice wavered. "What are you going to do to me?" "I'll take you, Mitch, and Roy to the sheriff," Sam replied, pausing before adding, "Come on, Earl. You can't hold out forever. You'll have to sleep sometime." Earl hesitated, glancing longingly at the front door. If this guy managed to take down Hank and the others, he thought, I don't stand a chance. Finally, he set the pistol on the table, moved away, and lay down on the floor. Before he could change his mind, Sam slipped through the door, bow drawn and arrow knocked. Seeing Earl surrendering, Sam relaxed the string, picked up the pistol, and tucked it into his waistband. Then, grabbing a few extra zip ties from the pantry, he knelt on Earl's back and secured him just as he had the others. Moving to Ray, he used his buck knife to cut the ropes around her wrists and helped her sit up. "Are you all right?" he asked. Ray nodded, rubbing her sore wrists and stretching her legs to get the blood flowing. "What about the others?" she asked. "Like I told Earl, 2 of them are hogtied up in the woods, Sam replied, giving her a grim smile. And Hank, well, I had to deal with him. Good, Ray said fiercely. That scum got what he deserved. Sam looked closely at her, noting the bruising on the left side of her face from earlier, the swelling on her right side, and a small cut at the end of her eyebrow. Let me get a cold towel for your face, he said, heading to the sink. As Sam turned away, Ray got to her feet, limping slightly, and approached where Earl lay on the floor. She kicked him 3 times, her voice filled with anger. How does that feel, you creep? Thought you could use me like some toy, huh? She drew her foot back for another kick, but Sam gently pulled her away, chuckling. Easy there, young lady, he said with a laugh. I thought I was the deadly one here. Ray leaned into his arms, still shaking with fury. I'm furious, Sam. All he talked about was what he and the others were planning to do to me. She took a deep breath and asked, so, what now? We can't call the sheriff. We don't have a landline on the farm, and our cell phones don't get any reception out here. Sam nodded. We'll take the truck into Van Buren and tell the sheriff what happened. Then he can follow us back here to deal with the garbage. Sam grinned and added, as for a landline, it'd cost a small fortune to run one all the way out here, and even if we could, I didn't come here to bring civilization with me, I came to escape it. Electricity's about all the modern convenience I'll tolerate. You ready? Ray nodded. Then let's head into town. Before leaving, Sam wrapped some ice cubes in a towel for Ray to reduce the swelling on her face. Howdy, Sam. Hello, Ray, Sheriff Jack Emerson greeted them as they arrived in Van Buren. What brings you to town? It's not your usual supply day. When he caught sight of Ray's bruised face, his expression shifted. What happened to you, Ray? You should get over to Doc Taylor right away. Sheriff Emerson, who had served Van Buren for over 15 years, was known for being a fair but formidable presence. Elected when he was just 25, he was so respected that, after a few years, no one even ran against him. Over 6 feet tall, with a lean, muscular build, he had a bit of gray starting to show, but his eyes were as sharp as ever, a look that made it clear he was not someone to cross. Had a bit of trouble out at the farm, Sam explained, giving a rundown of the day's events, with Ray adding in details here and there. 3 of the 4 men are tied up back at the house. Sheriff Emerson looked concerned. You said there were 4 of them. Where's the last one? Sam's tone was serious. He shot at me, so I had to handle it. He's up on the ridge. Emerson nodded approvingly. Sounds like they chose the wrong man to mess with. Get Ray over to Doc Taylor, and when you're ready to head back, my deputy and I'll follow. There wasn't much Doc Taylor could do for Ray's injuries. After examining her, he cleaned the cut on her face and secured it with a butterfly bandage. This won't leave a scar, so don't worry, he assured her. Here are some pain pills in case it gets too uncomfortable. That cold compress will help, but you'll look like a raccoon for a while. When they returned to the farm, Sam and Ray ignored Earl, who was still hogtied on the living room floor. They made lunch together, neither of them having eaten since the ordeal began. Hey, don't I get anything to eat? Earl whined. Sam shot him a glare. No, you don't. Be grateful you're still breathing. Now keep quiet until the sheriff arrives. After eating, Sam headed into the master bedroom. Inside the large closet was a hidden door to a gun safe where he kept his weapons. He carefully cleaned and unstrung his bow, putting it back in its holder. Then he took out his personal firearm, a Glock 21. .45 caliber pistol, clipped the holster to his belt beneath his rainproof jacket, and added a wide-brimmed waterproof hat before heading for the back door. I'm going to bring Mitch and Roy down for the sheriff, he explained to Ray. I'll come with you, Ray offered, but Sam shook his head, handing her Earl's 9mm and nodding toward their prisoner. Keep an eye on him, Sam instructed. If Sheriff Emerson shows up before I'm back, let him know where I am. We'll have more guests for him soon. Be careful, Ray said, pulling him in for a hug. I don't want anything happening to you. Sam returned her embrace and stepped out the back door, making his way up the ridge to where he'd left Roy. He found him lying on his side, soaked from the rain and snow, shivering from the cold. Sam cut the zip tie binding Roy's hands to his feet, then freed his legs while leaving his hands tied. Pulling his coat back, Sam showed Roy the pistol. You're going to walk down the hill in front of me, he ordered. If you try anything, or if you run, I'll shoot you and leave you to rot out here. Understand? Roy nodded, his face pale. Yes, he replied. Say it, Sam insisted. I understand, Roy said quietly. Sam guided Roy down the hill, the two of them moving slowly toward the farmhouse. As they climbed onto the porch, Sam called out, "It's me, Ray." He opened the door and pulled Roy inside by the arm, steering him into the kitchen. Sit down on the floor next to Earl, he ordered. Roy awkwardly lowered himself, and Sam went to the pantry for more zip ties. Stick your feet out in front of you, Sam said, and Roy complied, allowing Sam to secure his feet before pushing him back against the wall. What about me? Earl complained, his voice petulant. Why do I have to be tied like this while he gets to sit normally? Without a word, Sam pulled out his hunting knife, rolled Earl onto his stomach, and cut the zip tie connecting his hands and feet. That's all the consideration you're getting, so don't push it, Sam replied, his tone firm. Turning to Ray, he asked, You okay? Ray nodded, though she flinched slightly from the pain where Earl had struck her. I'm going to bring Mitch in, Sam said. Be back in about an hour. If they act up, don't hesitate to shoot, he instructed, then headed out the back door, taking the game trail to the left of the house. He found Mitch still slumped against the log where he'd tied him up. Mitch's hat was missing, and his hair was slicked down from the damp snow. Sam pushed him over, cut the ties binding his feet to his hands but kept his wrists secured behind him. Helping Mitch to his feet, Sam showed him the Glock and pointed down the game trail. If you try anything or run, I'll shoot you. Got it? Sam said flatly. Where are you taking me? Mitch asked, his voice uneasy. Back to the house to join your friends. The sheriff should be there by now. Mitch stumbled on the muddy path, falling to the ground. Careful, Sam said dryly as he helped him back up. Wouldn't want you getting hurt. As they approached the farmhouse, Sam spotted a large white van parked out front. Looks like your ride's here, he commented, guiding Mitch inside and pushing him down next to Roy and Earl. Sheriff Emerson, observing Sam's return, asked, You didn't bring the fourth man down? Sam shook his head. Nope. He's up on the ridge, just off the game trail, he replied. Emerson nodded thoughtfully. He should be buried. If you want him, he's yours to retrieve, Sam said, taking the coffee Ray offered. If not, well, the scavengers have to eat too. After a sip of coffee, he reconsidered. On second thought, I don't want him left on my land. Loan me a deputy, and I'll take the ATV up and bring him down. But we'll need a body bag, he might be pretty ripe by now. Emerson nodded. Just give the deputies directions. They'll bring him down with the ATV. Emerson then turned his attention to the three men on the floor. Give me a hand getting them into the van, he said, untying their feet but leaving their hands secured. Together, Sam and Emerson escorted each man to the large cargo van. The only seat was the front bench, the rest of the space had tie-down points for securing cargo. Emerson handcuffed each of them with their hands in front, cutting off the zip ties, then fastened them to separate tie-down rings, leaving them to sit on the floor as best they could. This is no way to ride. Roy complained. I can hog-tie you again and just toss you in the back if you prefer, Emerson replied coolly, silencing Roy. Sam looked at the van with curiosity. Where'd you get this van? Didn't think Van Buren had more than a couple of patrol cars. Emerson chuckled. You're right, we don't. After I talked to you, I headed to the U-Haul and rented this cargo van. Not too concerned about comfort for this lot, he added with a smirk. Soon, the deputies returned from the ridge, bringing the body on the front rack of the ATV. It was zipped into a body bag, though they had removed the arrow since it prevented them from closing the bag properly. They held on to the arrow, preserving it as evidence. They saved the arrow and left it in the back of the van. Riding the ATV up to the rear doors, the deputies opened them wide and carefully lifted their heavy cargo into the freight area. We need to secure the body so it doesn't slide around on the way back to town, Sam suggested. He offered to take the ATV back to the barn while the deputies climbed into the van, briefly arguing over who would get the passenger seat. Sheriff Emerson approached Sam, who was still seated on the ATV. Glad you and Ray came through this okay, Sam, he said, shaking his hand. He turned to walk away but paused, glancing back. Mind if I ask you something? Go ahead, Sam replied, nodding. Those guys couldn't have caught you out there in the woods, Emerson said, his tone thoughtful. You're like a ghost in those trees, you could have led them around until they wore out their boots. You stuck around for Ray's sake, didn't you? Sam smiled slightly and nodded again. Emerson's eyes narrowed. That's what I figured. But there's something else. You tracked those men, snuck up on 2 of them without their even knowing you were there. Why didn't you finish them all? I know you've got the guts to do it, so why let them live? Sam draped his leg across the ATV's tank, his gaze fixed across the valley toward the woods on the far side. After a long pause, he turned back to Emerson and answered, I'm a hunter, sheriff, not an executioner.